All right. Wow. Well, I see there are people there, Dr. Tarman. I see Kate and Angie. So we're going to get started. This is so exciting. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Healthy Living Live. I'm Chef AJ, and it is my distinct pleasure to be able to interview for the third time the person who I really believe is the leading expert on the subject of food addiction. She's a medical doctor. Her name is Dr. Vera Tarman. She's written an amazing book, which I'm going to ask her to hold up, only because I have the book on Audible, which I've listened to 3 times now. Please hold the book up, Dr. Tarman, so we can see it. It is called Food Junkies, The Truth About Food Addiction, and I think she knows more about this subject than anybody I've ever met. So welcome to the show for the third time, Dr. Vera Tarman, all the way from Canada. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I am delighted to be back on the third time.
Absolutely. I wish there was I hope I can say this for the 100th time, because that's how much I enjoy talking to you. So today, Dr. Tarman, what I wanted to focus on is something that I see happen often with people that are food addicts, at least in the program that I run, where they understand that in order to recover, they need to be abstinent from sugar and flour. They get it, whether it's difficult or not. They understand that. They attempt that. But they have a very difficult time because they have cravings. And then when you interrogate them further, it turns out that they're at the same time using other addictive substances other than sugar or flour. For example, they're having caffeine every day, maybe in the form of coffee or diet soda. They're having chocolate every day. Maybe they're having it without dairy and sugar, but they're munching on cacao nibs or using unsweetened cocoa powder in green smoothies. They're having alcohol, maybe occasionally or even every night. They're smoking cigarettes or vaping. They're having marijuana, either in the form of smoking it, vaping it, or having, medical edibles. They're using things like stevia in the form of the little dropper that they're putting in their water, or gum, or mints. Or they're having erythritol or xylitol to make up for the fact that they're not having sugar. Or one of my favorites is they're having, not my favorite, but I say this facetiously because I don't ever see people recovering from sugar and flour addiction without cravings. They're having Diet Coke or diet soda with aspartame. So I was wondering if you could talk about how having these other addictions are not only impacting the individual's health from a standpoint, but really impeding their recovery from food addiction, especially the cravings they're having from sugar and flour. So take it away, Dr. Tarman.
Okay, so I'm going to say that the kind of question that you're asking tells me that you're a clinician. You're working in the field with people, and you're seeing all of these various ways that people can get rehooked. And in the research, I mean, we're barely at the stage where we're talking about food as an addiction. So to start looking at the segues from a research point of view, you're not going to find a lot of support. So when you ask for an expert opinion, if the person is not a clinician, I don't think they're going to get what you're talking about. But those of us in the field, in the trenches, who are trying to deal with people who manage to get clean and then they keep relapsing, we see this all the time. And we see it in just plain addiction. A person says, look, I'm here to deal with my alcoholism. There's no problem with my eating sugar. There's no problem with my smoking cigarettes. And I should be able to smoke pot. Like, what's the problem? And we try to tell them, and by the time they leave our program, which is a residential program, and we got them for 4 weeks, so we can really hit them every day with it, they get that an addiction is an addiction is an addiction. It doesn't matter what the substance is, because it's not the substance, it's what's happening in the brain. And many roads lead to Rome. So a person may be an alcoholic, but a little bit of something sweet will get them going potentially to drinking again, or smoking pot will get them drinking again. Like they begin to get that when they leave. But we are still struggling with that on the food front. If you can get the person, which it sounds like you're saying, you finally get them to say, okay, I guess I have to stop sugar. All right, we'll give that one a go. But I don't have a problem with quitting alcohol. The ability to take that next step, there's a lot of resistance, partly because people say, what else am I going to do? I can't eat sugar. What else can I do? Why can't I have sweetener? So I guess that was a very long answer. The short answer is an addiction is an addiction. It doesn't matter where it is. If it's turning on the addiction phenomena in the brain, it doesn't matter how we do that. It'll turn it on. You can turn it on with pot and then eat too much. People have the joke, I'm allergic to alcohol. I break out in crack. I break out in sugar. I break out, it doesn't matter, it's all a reaction to the phenomena of addiction itself. That's a very long answer to your question. And if a person continually relapses, we have to say, what else is it that you may not think is addictive actually is?
Right. I love what you said. It actually turns on the addiction phenomena in the brain, because I believe that especially this, I see this especially with the Diet Coke and the alcohol drinkers, maybe more so than some of the others, because these are, if somebody has a glass of champagne once a year at a wedding, that's different than somebody that's drinking, a half a bottle of wine every night. But with certain of these addictions, for instance, smoking, for example, or coffee or Diet Coke, these are not once a year addictions. These are every day, probably multiple times a day. And I honestly haven't seen people recover when they have these, well, maybe not so much. There's some people with coffee that I see do okay. But, when I've talked to people, they say, work on the harder one first, quit smoking first.
Yes, but you know what? Even in the medical field, we finally stopped saying that, because we're realizing that people who quit smoking cigarettes when they quit their alcohol do better on both. Like when somebody says that now, that's you're not up to date on the research. And on that one, it's been shown it's much better to stop like smoking and another substance. So we just have to take that same thinking and stretch it over to food. And your comment about Diet Coke and sweeteners, people may say, although it's not really sugar, it doesn't really matter. It's the anticipation of the sweet that is the kicker. And on the level of addiction, if we think about addiction, some of your people may be fine having sweetener, or they may have been fine 5 years ago, but they aren't anymore. And we talk about addiction as being a chronic progressive disease that moves along the line, and there is a certain point at which they might have been able to get away with sweetener, but they can't anymore, or somebody else can because they haven't moved along the line of addiction as somebody else has. So that somebody else take Diet Coke and they're gone, and another person might still be able to get away with it. It's yeah.
Right. I once heard Dr. Joe Niflin say that a clean abstinence is an easy abstinence, and that when you're free of all the addictive substances, it makes it a lot easier to be free of the ones that you feel is the problem addiction for you.
Yeah, and that statement, that's so true, but that it boggles the mind of the person who has never tried that, because all they think about is, holy cow, I'm depriving myself of 20 things, whereas the person who's deprived themselves of those 20 things and no longer desires them is going, wow, I'm free of these things. I mean, she's absolutely right, but it's hard to convince that to your newcomer, basically, because they're just going, holy cow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this was known a long time ago, Dr. Tarman, because St. Augustine said many centuries ago that complete abstinence is easier than perfect moderation.
Yeah. Well, there you go. But we don't read him anymore.
Right. But it seems like abstinence is a tough sell for so many people, especially people that are addicted.
Yeah. And, it's not just that it's a tough sell, but there is deliberate intent to obscure that message in the food industry. We're constantly battling that, constantly. If it's not the food industry, it's our families that are saying, come on, just have a little bit. It's your birthday,
Right. Just one bite won't hurt.
Exactly. Yeah.
Unless you're an addict, then it will like it will hurt pretty bad. Could even kill you. Do you think there's a hierarchy in some of these substances? Like if somebody, I once had a guy come to the program and oh my God, he smoked cigarettes, he chewed tobacco, he drank alcohol, he chewed gum, he was a sex addict. He had pretty much every addiction. Do you think it's easier for people to just try to just wipe the slate clean and try to overcome them all at once? Or should we say, hey, a cup of black coffee in the morning isn't so bad. Let's work on the cigarettes and alcohol first.
Yeah, well, that's the same thing as what you were saying before. Should we, that is a debate that for which there is no, I don't think there's any answer. Usually in treatment centers, people have the option to do one or the other. Except when we're talking about drugs and alcohol. It depends on what treatment center, actually. Where I work at Renaissance in Toronto, Canada, we follow an abstinent model, so everything stops. And what it means is that it's going to hurt a lot for the first couple of weeks. But the good news is it depends on how you want to suffer. Do you want to hurt big but short, or do you want to not hurt so big but make it really, really long?
Yeah.
And I personally would rather get it all over with right away. And the thing about food is, I think and I've heard people say this is not just me. I hear this all the time from people who have had other substances. Now, the people who are just foodies may not get this, but hear it, please. Crack addicts, cocaine addicts, crystal meth addicts say sugar is harder to quit than crystal meth. It's harder. So, is there a hierarchy? We tend to, in the clinical world, say what will kill you first, and that tends to be the things that are the big crashes, like crystal meth or cocaine or crack, because it makes you homeless. They will all kill you. It's not so much are they all equally deadly, but one is faster than the other. So sugar and food is one of the slowest. It's like alcohol. You can be functional and gradually get cirrhosis and get sicker and sicker, and 20 years, 30 years, then you're dead. Same with sugar. Whereas with crack or crystal meth, it's 5 years, 10 years.
Could just move a little bit this way because you're coming out of frame. Yes, perfect. Now you're centered. A lot of people aren't even aware that they put sugar in cigarettes. You knew that, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's yes, absolutely. Which I think is one of the reasons why it's so hard to quit smoking. Is it the tobacco? I don't know. Or is it the sugar in the tobacco? Very good question. Yeah. I mean, having been an ex-smoker, I recall when I smoked cigarettes. I smoked when I was younger. I didn't have very much money. I used to roll my own cigarettes. There was no sugar in that. And I remember liking the TaylorMades a lot more, finding them much harder to quit, not knowing it's probably the sugar in the tobacco and in the filter tips that I was actually smoking.
And now so many people, including young people, are vaping as if that's supposedly better for us.
Yeah, that's right. And that one, well, it depends on, I actually worry about that one because that means that you can be smoking sugar that way. That really scares me. I mean, people think it's better than tobacco. In the clinical world, we're just saying you're just choosing a different cancer. It's a different lung cancer. That's all. You're still going to get it. It's a different one. It might not be as quick or maybe as many because there's 3 or 4 cancers, but it'll get you.
And don't you think the fact that they market the paraphernalia in such cute ways with such flavors, it's almost like they're purposely marketing it to teenagers?
Oh yeah, that's the same. Yes, for sure. Just like what they did for alcohol and women in the 90s and 2000s. All those sweet little drinks that men aren't going to drink that, but women are. So yes, it's exactly that. Yes.
Is there any way we can take these industries down, like have a class action lawsuit against them or the process? I mean, it's just incredible to me that this, knowing what we, it was different in the 40s when it was glamorous for the movie stars to smoke because before they knew what they knew. But now we know what we know. It just seems unconscionable that these companies get away with doing this and hooking customers for life from a young age.
Yeah, and it's the young age piece that's so scary because it really will they'll have a dedicated audience or a dedicated group of people that will buy their stuff. And, it's not just that it's going to make a nation of addicts, which I think it will, because following our initial discussion about how easy it is to substitute from one to another, those people are going to be smoking eating their sweets that are marketed for them to eat their sweets will very easily pick up cigarettes and pot in their 20s, and then will very easily pick up alcohol, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not just that. It's also we're creating a nation of diabetics. We're creating a nation of people with high cholesterol and heart disease, in their 20s and 30s. We're going to pay for this big time. But, it's going to happen.
I forget if it was this Surgeon General or the last one said this is the first generation of children that will not outlive their parents.
Wow, isn't that interesting, eh? Yeah, and I believe that. I believe that. And when we talk about can we afford healthcare, no, we can't. Like, I know you guys don't really have Obamacare anymore, but I remember thinking, whoa, you guys aren't going to be able to afford this. We in Canada with our socialized medicine, we're not going to be able to afford it either. Like, it's going to crash But it's not going to be because it's not a good cause. It's because we're creating conditions that we're going to have to treat and that will overbear us. It's not just that. It's potentially even things like Alzheimer's, like the whole system. What would be a much better approach would be to change our diet. Yeah. So much cheaper. And then we could afford healthcare.
Mm-hmm. You know? Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I've never met one person that's recovered from any addiction that said it wasn't worth it and that they felt better than when they were using. Yet it seems like it's such a tough sell, you know, when somebody is in the throes of addiction, you know, to show them what their life could be like without these substances. Like you know, having been in recovery now for 6 years, to me, my abstinence is like, it's the number one priority, you know, like that's the most important thing to me. And to me, abstinence is bliss. I don't see it as deprivation, you know? And when people say, you know, because my birthday's coming up and they go, oh, you mean you're not going to have a piece of cake on your birthday? You're not going to have a treat? And I'm like, after being 200 pounds, having this figure and having a brain that's calm, that's the treat. I get a treat every day, you know?
But you have to be there to see that, right?
Yeah.
And you're not, your brain has not been captivated by the addiction clause of, or I can't think of a good analogy right now. The cage, the prison of addiction. You're out of that. When you're in that, all you can think of is, how will I not, survive my next fix? Like I often ask my patients who are trying to get off of alcohol or cocaine or whatever, okay, you know you can't have your alcohol or cocaine. How would you feel if tonight I'm saying you won't be able to have your sweets, your little snacks that you have at night, because they're eating them like crazy, and they just shake their head and shudder. Whoa, I don't know. So there is a good 1 or 2 or 3 weeks that it takes for the dopamine receptors to downregulate to a place where they can actually feel what you're talking about. You know, in the 12-step world, we talk about, step 1 is admitting that you're powerless over this whole thing that we're talking about, that addiction is addiction and it's powerful. But then there's, step 2 and 3, which rely on faith. And that person has to believe, but they will not feel what you're talking about. You're talking about, I feel better without that substance. They can't feel that until they're there. They just have to go on faith. And that's very hard to, I don't know who you are. You could be just lying to me, is what the addict is thinking. They have to be either so desperate that they're willing to take the chance, or they really trust the person that's telling them that. So there you are, Chef AJ, with your show, and people are following, and they're willing to give you that little glimpse, that, what do we call that crack in the light. Just give it a chance, and then, they follow you, and then they find out, yeah, you're right. But you should ask your people, like, what was it that made them stay that extra minute to listen and try?
You know, it's interesting because I think a lot of people are running around not even knowing how addicted they are, because it's so prevalent right now. And like I say, it wasn't until recently that people learned that sugar was so addictive. And then even those that learned sugar were addictive were like, well, no, flour's not addictive. We make bread from flour. And maybe it isn't addictive. Not all addictive substances are addictive for all people. And I think with food, it's maybe you'd agree, Dr. Tarman, it's harder, because if somebody is a methamphetamine addict, they don't have to go to their kid's soccer game and be offered methamphetamines, but there's going to be donuts there, right? And a meth addict doesn't have to go to the hardware store and see the meth, but they're going to see M&Ms at the register. So with food, it's so prevalent, it's so insidious. You can't, unless you're willing to just stay home and not watch television, you're going to be exposed like hundreds of times a day.
God, even on Facebook, even on social media, it's there. Yeah, even, the benign person who posts the dessert that they made that day and they want to show it off, there it is again. Yeah, I know, it's extremely difficult.
Yeah. But it's so funny because, I love in some days I just want to like hit my head against the wall, because, as you know, working with addicts can be very frustrating, especially when they don't even, it almost seems like Shakespeare said, methinks thou doth protest too much. The ones that squawk the most about not being addicted are often usually the worst addicts. But the ones that actually, climb out and recover, it's like we share such a kinship, because nothing feels as good as recovering from it. I mean, nothing. I can't think. I've had some major accomplishments in my life. I've been on the Tonight Show. I've written books. That, but that feeling of recovering from an addiction, and it's like the greatest gift you can give yourself. To just feel good all the time and not have that longing and that craving, because the constant cravings, whether it's for a cigarette or some gum with stevia or a cup of coffee, that runs your life. Addictions run your life. And I like that I run my life now.
Yeah. One of the things you said, and we wanted to talk about this, is that, you say that you feel good all the time. And a person who's an addict, unless you're not an addict, you don't get this. People just think, they're just trying to get happy all the time. And, why can't they just stop and get a grip and, go to work and do all that kind of stuff. But it's not that. They're trying to avoid feeling depressed, and they're trying to avoid crashing. They're trying to avoid getting back into anxiety, and using that substance gives them that little moment of relief or hope for relief, which we're now taking away from them. But you see, what you're saying is I don't have that anxiety. I don't have that depression, except for appropriate stuff that's, appropriate to life. One thing that's really useful to know is that when a person is in addiction, they're not just in addiction, they're in depression and anxiety and post-traumatic stress, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when they stop, also in 3 or 4 weeks, that stuff gets better too. It's not just that the cravings go away, but the moods start to stabilize, so that you're not depressed and anxious. You're just, I'm not feeling so good today, but I can handle it, So we're talking about, this is a mood alterer as well, and that will be stabilized, and that's a big deal.
Yeah,
it's a big deal because people are so used to being anxious.
How much of the use, whether it's the cigarette or the Diet Coke, is to actually feel good or to not feel bad? You know what I'm trying to say? Because it just, to me, when I watch people in the throes of addiction, it doesn't seem to me like they're getting that much pleasure. It seems more like they're just avoiding the pain of detoxification withdrawal. I mean, it's different when, maybe you see somebody, like, for instance, my husband's not a food addict, and he doesn't eat very much sugar, but he can eat it. And when he eats it, he's like, oh, this is really good. And I think he is actually getting pleasure from it. He doesn't generally finish it. But when I see food addicts indulging in their addiction, or even smokers, it doesn't seem like, oh my God, this feels so good. It's, oh my God, this is helping me to not feel so bad.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that motivation, like if your listeners can hear that initially, yes, we are taking away the safety blanket, but you won't need that safety blanket. And it's not about feeling good. It's just about, you won't feel bad anymore. Can you imagine waking up and not feeling bad? Like, holy cow. But that's what you were describing a few minutes ago. And sugar and flour and some of these artificial sweeteners, and depending on what you're sensitive to, will give you that state of mind of feeling bad, or that you're constantly trying to self-medicate yourself. You won't need to do that anymore. And it doesn't actually take that long. So all those conditions that I'm expected to diagnose, which I've got to tell you, I really am loath to do. Somebody comes in and says, doctor, I'm always anxious. Doctor, I'm always depressed. I'm always, I think I got post-traumatic stress. And I'm not to say that these things don't exist, but I want to see them clean from sugar along with their substance use. If it's obvious if they're drinking alcohol, let's stop the alcohol first and see what's up. I would love to be able to have the validity and the clinical support to say, let's stop the sugar, come back in 3 months, and then we'll talk about your moods. I can't do that.
Because what I hear, I listen, I've had trauma and drama and abuse and all that with my life, and I'm not trying to minimize that for people that have had it, and I have stress and have had stress in my life. But what I see a lot, and you tell me how you feel about this, if you think it's just really making excuses. People say it is difficult, especially if you're in the throes of addiction, to all of a sudden be abstinent from your addictions, whether it's sugar, flour, or tobacco.
Yeah.
But what people often say to me is the reason they can't do it, or the reason when they attempt, they relapse, is because they have stress, or because they have anxiety, or because they have a depression, or because they have a past history of trauma or abuse. And I say to them, yes, have had all these things, but the reason you can't do it is because you're an addict, not because of what happened to you.
Yeah, that's right. And you're in the drugs still, And so you can't even see what your resourceful nature is, if there is any resourcefulness that you have. We've done research on why is it that some people are resilient and others aren't. And I'd like to know if there was ever a variable about diet. Have they actually measured diet? Maybe those resilient people, are not sugar addicts or food addicts or in the throes of their eating, so that they actually are able to respond well. So, when you can't expect an alcoholic to figure it out with their stress, because first of all, they're getting more stressed by the drug, sugar, alcohol, whatever it is. And everything is going to seem so much bigger, everything. And I see people after they've been sober, clean from sugar or from other drugs, looking at their problems going, I feel like I have more ability now to go back and deal with those things that they couldn't have done when they were in it. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, because I think that especially people with anxiety and depression and stress, when you use these drugs, whatever they are, they may comfort you for like, what is it? Like get like a 3-minute hit of dopamine, but it actually makes your stress, your anxiety, and your depression work. And if you're using to medicate because of a past trauma, deal with that past trauma, because it's not going to fix it.
No. And, let's throw in attention deficit. There's another one. Like, what does sugar do? Oh my God. It just makes it just scatters you. So because these are literally blitzes of dopamine that you get, these little jolts, and then you've lost it. So yeah.
After a certain point, though, whether it's sugar or flour, don't they need more and more just to get less and less of the effect? It's never like the first time. Like whatever the drug is, it's never like that first hit.
No, exactly. I mean, that's exactly it. So, where they might have gotten away with just having a half of a chocolate bar one day, now they're having 3 or 4. And that's not just with sugar, that's also with the antidepressants and the other medications too. It works for a while, and then you got to double the dose or add a third one on. And that's the same thing that's happening with sugar. It's the same thing that's happening with other drugs. The brain doesn't want to be tampered with regardless of the substance, and it will always try to upregulate and normalize what you're doing. So my suggestion, and I think it's yours too, is let's just stop all of that and go back to square one and clean the plate completely of all this stuff. And you won't need to upregulate, because it's normal life. Like, that's where we're supposed to be. And that's a hard sell.
I'm taking notes. I mean, I'll watch this again, but I love what you just said. The brain doesn't want to be tampered with regardless of the substance.
Yeah.
Because when we take antidepressants, it's not because we're deficient in Zoloft.
No, that's right. No, we're deficient in serotonin, and that's just a simple explanation. And we've seen all this literature about how the opposite of addiction is connection and all that kind of stuff. How we're essentially becoming more lonely, because of social media, not satisfying that need to connect. We're getting worse and worse that way. So our addictions are going to get bigger and bigger. So, I mean, really what's happening is the more we become deficient with real life, which we screw up in because, people are going to choose to eat their food rather than go out that night. They're getting more and more lonely, more and more deficient in their real own ways of getting serotonin. So they're going to have to do it artificially through their drug.
Wow.
With Zoloft, or whether it's, bagels and popcorn. Both of them will give you serotonin.
What I've heard is that exercise is the most underutilized antidepressant and anti-anxiety medication, and that it actually can help one, prevent an addiction in the first place or even recover from it. Do you ever, with your patients, suggest these types of recovery activities while they're trying to overcome their addictions?
So it's not just exercise, but laughter is another one, right? Laughter is a great one. Exercise I'd be careful with, because it's the kind of people that I see in relation to food addiction have already abused that one. And so how to moderate that, I would put that aside right now. I think it's absolutely essential. I mean, people think, okay, I've just exercise and I'm going to lose weight. And obviously we know that that's not the point, and it doesn't work anyway. I would suggest that for my other addicts like alcohol and cocaine, absolutely. But for food, I'd be careful, just because of there's usually rampant abuse of exercise.
But what about something like yoga that's more kind of mind body? That's not really going to,
or something like super slow exercise or slow burn or something like
walking.
that.
What about walking?
Beautiful. or swimming. Beautiful. Yeah. So those are kind of
Absolutely.
more slow, more less cardio, because cardio is very excitable, right? It's the adrenaline pump, and you got to be careful with that one, I think.
Well, how about meditation? Because I think that really helps with addiction.
Perfect. Love it. Love it. Meditation is great. Laughter is great. Great. Connection is great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I've read somewhere that people that stop smoking after a certain amount of years, their lungs can almost return to the state of a non-smoker. People with these types of like food addictions, at a certain point, are we normal again, or are we, or is it once an addict, always an addict?
Well, okay. So that is a debate that has not yet been resolved. I have my own opinion about that, which is based on not on solid research, because it hasn't been researched, but I think I can justify my explanation. I tend to see it in the same way as the diabetic. Once the person has become a diabetic, they've become insulin insensitive, and so there's something happening to the whole insulin receptors and sugar moderation. When they are managing sugar, when they stop eating the sugar, their blood sugars will normalize. They may even just be on a good diet and not have to take meds, but their blood sugars are normal. It's no longer 20, it's 5 to 7, which is what we want. But the moment they start eating sugar again, I mean, are they actually now no longer diabetics? They're still diabetics, because you give them sugar and it soars back up to 20 and 30. I think our numbers are different in Canada than the States, but anyway, triple the normal amount. And similarly with the addiction, I think that if the person does the lifestyle changes, like the good food, the abstinence from the drugs, they will look normal and behave normal. It's almost like we've compensated so that everything is normal. But the moment you reintroduce the abundance of, not sugar in this case, but dopamine, you've got the person hyper reacting again in the same way as they would if they were diabetic with sugar. So there's still a hyper reaction, which we call in that world, in the neurological world, kindling. There's still a kindled effect, which I think is when we talk about, is there a permanent brain change? Yes, I think there is. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And can I prove that? I can say, yes, there is a change in the dopamine 2 receptors. But have we clinically shown that? No, because we haven't got there yet. However, I think it makes a lot of sense, and it certainly plays itself out in my clinical practice. Because somebody goes back out after 10 years, it doesn't take them long before they're right back to where they were or worse, right?
Do you think that that sometimes after a prolonged period of abstinence, relapse, it's like more powerful, like after they've been abstinent, like, because then whatever happens with these dopamine receptors, maybe they're sensitive again, and now it's like, wow, this is like, because I think about the actor Philip Seymour Hoffman. I think he was a heroin addict, and he was abstinent from heroin and alcohol for something like 23 years, and then he had one drink, and then boom, he was dead. So after a long period of abstinence, is it more dangerous to relapse?
Yes, it is more dangerous, because you still have the euphoric recall of when you were using, and that kind of big memory you don't forget. We don't forget our big experiences, the first kiss, the first marriage, the first job. We don't forget those things, but we forget that we don't have the tolerance that it took. So that's probably what happened with him. He expected to get that high, had a little bit, didn't have the reaction, and then just said, well, I'm just go back to what I was, and he was dead. But the other thing is, I mean, Philip Seymour Hoffman was a big guy. And I want to suggest also, on top of that euphoric recall piece and remembering that, he was still feeding his addiction. It wasn't like it was quiescent and then it sparked up. It was all going all along, but with probably food and smoking, because I think he was still a smoker. So. Yeah. Here's the idea of, your people who are still relapsing or still struggling, white knuckling it. Was he still feeding his addiction with food and with other things that he didn't think he was an addict? Because we see a lot of alcoholics who relapse, and you look at them and their waistline is ballooned since they stopped drinking because they moved their alcohol to food. And sure enough, when they drink alcohol again, the addiction never stopped. It has chronically progressed because something kept it going.
Yeah. Mary just posted a saying that I've heard, and it says, once you become a pickle, you can't go back to being a cucumber.
Yeah. Yeah. And I am of that camp of thinking.
Yeah. So do you believe that people can recover from an addiction, or they just develop these cross addictions and then maybe create healthier addictions, like for me, volunteer work, exercise, meditation?
Sure, but that's not a healthy addiction. You see, I would argue with you that is a healthy recovery action, because are you volunteering to the point of impairment of your life?
No, I do it 3 hours a week.
Exactly.
But it makes me feel really good. I know, people say, "Oh, you're so wonderful for doing this," and I'm like, no, I think Mother Teresa was probably doing it for the same. It makes me feel good. That's why
But what you're illustrating is how life can actually make you feel good. Like, and doing service. That's why AA is so big on service and fellowship, because these things actually make you feel good. And you have found your way of maximizing natural rewards so that in the way that we should do them. Exactly. So, but they're not addictive. So, if you were doing those natural behaviors in a way that you couldn't choose anymore how many hours you were going to do, it was going to impair your life, then I would say, okay, let's have a talk. Let's talk about if this is an addiction. But it's not, because you're doing it the way. I would suggest that everybody who's watching this should follow what is your passion, folks, and can you maximize it to the point where you get that joy that you get, that I get from doing this, but not to the point of impairment. That, I think, is the best sell for recovery. Is stop.
I know. And I started going back. A long time ago, I was a comedian, and I started going back to improv class. And I get so, like you talked about laughter. Laughter really is the best medicine. And I also started to paint. And when I paint, I don't even think about eating even any kind of food, because when I'm involved with something that I love, I don't even think about food. Actually, I don't think about food anymore except when I'm hungry. But if I'm painting, I don't ever think about food because I'm painting.
Yeah. So exactly. There you go. So this is what recovery is. It's not just about, you talk about deprivation. You don't look like a deprived person. Yeah. But when you're in the food, you are deprived of all these things because you don't want to bother. You can't do them. If you have the ability to be funny, means that you have to be intuitive. You have to be able to listen to the moment and what the moment offers. An addict is so insulated in their own thing, they can't do that.
Yeah. I don't feel like the only thing I feel like I'm depriving myself of is obesity, heart disease, diabetes. I wish people, would try recovery, because it's really awesome. Now, Julie writes a comment. She says, I have stopped drinking wine and I feel myself dipping into a depression and I have lots of anxiety. How long before these symptoms will go away? And what other symptoms should I be aware of in the next couple of weeks?
Well, the thing is, so if Julie is, stop drinking wine, just to make sure that she's not picking something else up that will carry it on. So remember, I was talking, you can do a big crash or you can do a protracted one. If she or somebody who does that stops and doesn't continue it on in some way, by Diet Cokes or something like that, then usually the withdrawal, I'm imagining that it's not serious withdrawal, but anyway, usually it's anywhere from 10 days to 3 to 4 weeks, and depending on how much the person has been drinking, like if they were using half a bottle of wine at night to fall asleep, that sort of thing, that really messes up the sleep cycle, and so that could take months to go away. But the worst of it is usually within a 4-week period, which is why treatment centers are 3 to 4 weeks. Mm-hmm. A lot of them are 3 months, because that gives you that extra mood so that you can walk out feeling good. But that first month, that's what we call post-acute withdrawal. And that's we like to lock people up, because it sometimes is so hard to say no when it's in your face. Here you are in a contained, safe environment for that first month.
Right.
So
Well, that was going to be my next question. How important do you think a person's environment is to their recovery from any addiction?
huge, 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 huge. So for a food addict, a person that quits food, if they're living in an environment where their family is still eating that stuff, that's really hard. And it's not only that, I know people who because they're real foodies, it's their job. They've become the pastry chef, they've become the whatever. So now they've got to decide, what am I going to do about that? But environment is huge, because when you're, especially in that first month of what feels like deprivation, and I would just like to say that's not what deprivation, that's a withdrawal symptom. When you have that stuff in your face, choice is so small compared to the desire to want something. And a lot of recovery tools are not about strengthening choice. Please hear that. It's not about strengthening choice. It's about learning how to change the environment, so that that little bit of choice that you have, you can use sparingly and preciously. It's enough to call somebody for help. It's enough to, it's like a 20-minute period of time that you've got that you can literally say no. And that's going to be the 20 minutes to get you out of that environment. Like, sorry, I got to go. I got to get a ride home. I can't stay here anymore. Or I got to call somebody, or I got to do something. And if you don't use it that way, then you're toast.
Wow. So many pearls of wisdom are coming out of your mouth today. I just wrote down, you said it's not deprivation, it's withdrawal. So many people say, well, if I don't eat sugar and flour, I'm going to want them more. Well, you're not going to want, you're going to want them more whether you give them up or don't give them up. And that's because you're addicted to it. So what you're really saying, it's not what they're saying is deprivation, is really withdrawal.
It's withdrawal. Yeah. And I'm sure every one of those people, I remember this myself when I was in the food. As I was eating it, I was already thinking about the next meal. And could I make that next meal better than what I was eating right then, which was something I was thinking about 2 minutes before. So you're right. It never ends, the more. And the more you have it, the bigger that more is. And that more is dopamine. That very feeling of more is dopamine. So the more you feed dopamine, the bigger it gets. And when you stop, you're still feeling the dopamine. And now we're talking about what we were saying earlier. You just don't want to feel bad. So, but you got to get through that until the dopamine receptors deregulate, and then the dopamine gets smaller and less, to the point where you can manage it. So you can manage it by saying, I want to feel a bit of excitement. I'm going to go to a comedy routine. I mean, good for you. I wouldn't want to do that one. That would scare me. But somebody else would do that. You would do that. Somebody else would do some, I don't know, some kind of something else that's daring and daring to their whatever they, you know what I'm saying.
Right. So yeah. Nikki just posted, I think you are fabulous, Dr. Tarman. I completely agree. And if you're joining us in progress, I'm speaking to Dr. Vera Tarman, the author of Food Junkies, The Truth About Food Addiction. If you have not read that book, walk, don't run to either Amazon or Audible, and please get it immediately. It's absolutely incredible. When we talked about the environment being so important and critical to one's recovery from addictions, we have so many people that are living with people that don't understand. And they maybe understand with alcoholism that if their spouse is an alcoholic, they can't have alcohol in the house. But when it comes to food, especially junk food, which Americans eat something like 67% of their calories from, they make it really hard on the person in recovery. And rounds where the children, and it's usually the husband, but because most of my clients are women, but sometimes it's the wife, where they just refuse to not eat these foods outside the home. To me, that's so rude and disrespectful and unloving. How do you deal with that? Because how can you ever recover if your addiction is always there? And if you're the one that's forced to shop for it, cook it,
You're right. That's the whole problem. And it's two things that are happening. One, the addict, which is the husband or whoever, the kids, are also addicts and they're not ready to quit. It's that simple. Or they won't acknowledge the potency and power of food as an addiction in the same way as cocaine or crystal meth. Because if we exchange that for crystal meth, please don't have that in the house, they get it. But they don't get it with food because they're not willing to give that credibility. So it's our job, you and I, to publicize this to the point where we can say this is as powerful an addiction. I think even more powerful than these other drugs. So let's give it the respect it deserves. And if I can just say, I'm sure I've said it before, but I want to say it again, that I think food addiction, sugar addiction, flour addiction, whatever becomes sugar, or the brain thinks is sugar, hence artificial sweeteners. The brain was made for food. It wasn't made for cocaine or crystal meth. Crystal meth and cocaine have just hijacked a brain that was made for sugar. So when you get rid of those drugs, you got a system that's vulnerable to these substances that the food industry knows and has been taking, addressing, targeting. So if we can start calling it what it is, partners will get it, unless they're addicts and they don't want to get it.
Right.
Now, I've never heard somebody say, I'm going to leave my husband because he's still drinking pop in front of me. You'll hear them say he's still drinking booze in front of me. One day, maybe we will. Maybe we will. I don't know. It would be just so much easier if they went in the back shed and hid their crates of diet or whatever pop there.
Yep, absolutely. I always tell the people, like, you're not telling your family that they can't have these things. You're just asking them to respect you and just have them outside the home. And I don't think that's unreasonable. No. But then they say, oh, well, my husband said that I need to have more self-control.
Oh, right. Yeah, exactly. So that's an appreciation, not that addiction is not about control, and it really isn't about control. The control we have is to control our environment. That is what
exactly. Thank you. Every expert I've ever interviewed said that, but yet it seems to be like it escapes the people. I've been saying for at least 10 years, if it's in your house, it's in your mouth.
Yes, that's right. It's in your mouth. That's right. And it's a matter of best, even the Dalai Lama, 20 minutes, and then it's in your mouth. So you've got 20 minutes to get the hell out of that house or change the environment. Yeah.
And it's so much easier to change the environment than to try to do all these other things, to like have gastric bypass surgery or, that's not dealing with the problem. Do you notice that there seems to be a prevalence of eating disorders in people with food addiction, or is that am I just noticing that?
This is one of the biggest quagmires of probably why food addiction is having such a hard time getting acknowledged as an independent condition. Because if somebody walks in and gives all the symptoms of food addiction, a clinician who is resistant, I have to say resistant, because how can they not see this unless they don't want to see it, and says there's no such thing as food addiction, they're going to fulfill the criteria of a binge eating disorder at the very least, often bulimia, because they throw up their food so they can eat more, which by the way, alcoholics will do too. They'll throw up and then they'll drink more, or they'll do cocaine so they can drink more. Like, they'll find ways to continue on the process. So it's very hard to know, are eating disorders really food addicts that just look like binge eating because we're not asking the right questions, or are they two separate conditions? I think they probably are two separate conditions, but even worse, and I've heard clinicians say this, people who work with both, that they can be both at the same time. They become both. Somebody who might have been an eating disorder, like an anorexic, for example, goes into a treatment center for anorexia, gets fed all sorts of crap, like sugar and starch and flour, to the point where they develop an addiction to that because they're starving. That's part of anorexia. You're heightened. You have a heightened reaction to those substances, and now you've got a food addiction that you might not have had before. Whereas if we had treated that anorexic without that, like just eating like non-processed foods, that might not have happened. This is the big problem: is how do we ferret out and unentangle these conditions? My suggestion would be, let's just give everybody a food addict diet, which is basically...
Well, it's actually a healthy diet. It's I wrote a book 7 years ago. I still haven't sent it to you. I will. I'm waiting for my next book to come out so I can mail them both at the same time. But I wrote a book called Unprocessed. And it's, Jack LaLanne had been saying for 70 years, if God made it, eat it. If man made it, don't eat it. And I meet people, like, for example, when I speak, I met a guy from, what's that country in Africa? I can't think of it now, where they eat teff. It was a country in Africa, and they don't have food addiction in his country, and they don't have anorexia or bulimia because they have food in their country.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we wouldn't have food addiction the way that we have it now if we were eating like that. Yes,
Right.
yeah, exactly.
Nikki wants to know if alcoholics and drug addicts are also often food addicts. Do you think that maybe some people are just born with like less dopamine and just
There is already research that's pointing to the fact that a person has an altered dopamine response. I think didn't you mention that once before? Maybe not. It's an altered dopamine reaction. So genetically, we've seen that people with alcohol addiction have, not everybody, but some people have a dopamine 2 receptor deficiency, which makes them more likely to become alcoholics. But we also see that those people in their families also have a lot more obesity. So it just stands to reason that the two are the same. But we've also seen that the more obese a person becomes, the more their body mass index goes beyond 30, which is considered obese, the more altered their dopamine 2 receptors are. So
interesting.
Will do that. And so we've got genetics, and we've got the phenomena of just gaining weight. And then we've got the phenomena of using. Because if I've been drinking or using a drug, I'm doing something to my dopamine 2 receptors, which is going to make me more receptive to becoming a food addict. It's why it doesn't matter what the substance is. It's this that's getting changed. And anybody who is struggling with food has got to look, what am I still eating that could be feeding the addiction? And if it's not food, what am I still doing outside of that? Like sex or gambling. Gambling's a good one. Shopping, that's another good one. And these are so normalized that you don't even recognize it. What are some other ones? Smoking cigarettes. The diet.
Some people it's pornography.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Sex addiction.
Yeah. Workaholics. Some people.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. And again, we normalize these things to the point where we don't see them as aberrations. But
I have a friend that's cleaning. Actually, she's one of my dear friends, and hers is cleaning, and I love having her as a friend because she'll come over and clean my house. That one I completely accept. One of the things I've always said, Dr. Tarman, is you're either eating for your recovery or you're eating for your addiction. And every bite of food in my mouth is either going to keep me in recovery or going to put me back in addiction, because you can't do both.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's right. No, you can't do both. Yeah.
Yeah. You can't. So what's your take? I've interviewed quite a few of even other psychiatrists and doctors. What is your take on emotional eating? Because do you think that is a real thing, or is it just an excuse?
It is a real thing in the sense that when you eat foods, they have, it's what we said earlier, they have a mood altering effect. Mm-hmm. And I mean, they do. So it makes sense. But
I guess what I mean is people saying, well, I had to go eat this because this happened and it made me sad. And then I say to them, oh, so you mean you never ate a cupcake any other day other than when you were sad? Oh, yeah. No, I had one yesterday when everything was fine. Did you get what I'm trying to say? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it works, so people use it. But is it a good idea? I mean, no, because anything like that, especially if it's a food addiction, I mean, it's a bit like saying, is it okay to have a bottle of wine when I'm feeling down? We say, no, it's not okay. If the person is able to moderate and truly moderate, maybe once in a while, but that's not the people that you're seeing. It's not the people that I'm seeing. Emotional eating, I think, is an illustration that food moderates mood, and that is also the entry point into addiction. Much better that you, and I'm sure this is what you do, try to get them to abstain and then deal with the emotion.
Right, absolutely, because it's really hard. I mean, we have people in the group that have been seeing their psychiatrist for 10 years, and they're no thinner, they're no better,
no,
because they're not abstinent.
No, exactly, and they've been using the food to not deal with the issue. Right. Yeah, and the psychiatrist is probably not thinking that their eating is getting in the way of the work that they're doing. And they're probably thinking themselves, it's been 10 years, why are you not changing? Why are you not doing the things that I'm suggesting that you do? Well, they don't have to, because when they were in distress, they cut the distress by their muffin, and so that they didn't have to do that thing, that intervention he was or she was suggesting.
Yeah.
I know when I did psychotherapy just by itself, before I got into addiction years ago, I would get so frustrated because people would not do their homework. And it was like, later I realized, well, they didn't have to, because they went home and they ate, or they smoked pot, or they did something.
Right.
It went away. They said, well, I felt better when I got home because I did such and such. Well, I wanted to feel better by the intervention
like
that
it makes it feel better forever, though. I mean, like I understand the use of food or alcohol or smoking as a coping mechanism, but it doesn't seem effective because they have to keep doing it, you know?
Exactly. It only retards the process. Like it gives you a moment. It's like the movie is playing, it stops, but it doesn't go away. It just, when you come back to sobriety, it continues on. Even if the person, I remember this, people saying, well, if I can get to the place where I'm crying and I'm upset and, I need the booze to do that, even if they, abreact and get out all that stuff, when they get sober, it's as if that didn't even happen. You have to be sober in order to work through emotional issues to resolution.
Wow, this has just been amazing. Well, I want to respect your time. We're almost at the hour. Is there anything you want to say to either inspire people or give them hope? Because we know that this is not an easy thing to overcome.
Yeah, well, maybe just to say, maybe just quickly, two things. One, if the person is dealing, which they probably are, because remember we said when you're trying to quit something, you're eating to not feel bad anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you stop eating, you're gonna feel bad for a few weeks. And so if the person is taking an antidepressant or they're taking some other drug to try to ride through those few weeks, it's not going to work. Because the antidepressant makes you want to eat, for one thing. Especially the antipsychotics, they are real sugar. I mean, they just make the whole hunger thing continue. So you're kind of kicking yourself, your recovery, you're stopping it in that regard, or retarding it, slowing it down. So be careful what you do. Just the best thing to do is to abstain and then get help. And just know that it's time limited. It really is. That feeling of deprivation is a physical manifestation of withdrawal, and it will pass like all the other symptoms will pass. And then the other thing I want to say, which we've already said, but it's a good way to end, is that when it has passed, you will be free of that need to feel not bad, because you'll feel fine.
Right. And you might even feel good.
Yeah, and you might even feel good, and then you'll have the access and the tools to feel better, like doing comedy, or like going back to school, or like finally dating and asking out that person that you've been afraid to ask out. Like you'll be able to do all those things that you thought you were too socially anxious to do before. You weren't.
Right. So much what we talked about today, it was my story. I used to smoke. I used to be anorexic. I used to be bulimic. Believe it or not, I used to be a pastry chef. So I hit all those notes. Yeah. Last question. How important do you think is support for people in recovering from the disease of food addiction?
I think it's so important because, we like the big line now, the opposite of addiction is connection. I think that support is, first of all, it's really important because especially in that pause, that 1 month period of time when you are hurting, your ability to control it's a bit like saying, I'm not going to be afraid when there's a gun in your face. Of course you're going to be afraid. And your ability to stay there and to not fight, in other words, pick up and use again, like resist that bad feeling, is tremendously difficult. And if you have other people there sitting beside you saying, I know what it's like, I've been there, and it will pass, it's so much easier. Nice. They can't make it go away, but they can give you the faith that you'll get through that 3 or 4 weeks. That's all it is, folks, if you would do it abstinently. And having support it's not just that it's a comfort, I think it's actually crucial. Mm-hmm. Or lock yourself up in a room somewhere. But, it's better to just have the support. And
if people want to come to your program and get locked up, how would they do that if they live in Canada? In
Canada, they just call Renaissance, which is our treatment center, and we have a 4-week food addiction program. And thank you. If there's any Canadians, please, we would be happy to have you.
And we do Adria's on. We do have some Canadians watching right now. And if you don't live in Canada, please consider my program for support. I could just literally talk to you every day. You're just such a depth and breadth and wealth of knowledge, and especially on this subject. And please, guys, get Dr. Tarman's book, Food Junkies, The Truth About Food Addiction. I have it on Audible, and it's fantastic. You can listen to it while you're taking a walk, and it's such a good book. And I know if you suffer from this disease, you will see yourself in it. But there is hope thanks to people like Dr. Tarman working on the front and myself doing my little piece here in Los Angeles. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Tarman. And thank you guys for watching another episode of Healthy Living Live. I'm Chef AJ, and I make healthy taste delicious, even though it's abstinent. Take care, everyone.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. It's always hard to get it to shut off. It's like, come on. There we go. I could be here all day shutting this off. Come on. This happens.